Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Dave's Faves. And today we're talking about Beethoven, chamber music. No, not the string quartets, not the violin sonatas, not the piano sonatas, not the piano trios. We're talking about the cello sonatas. These are fascinating works. And I want to talk about them in a little bit of detail before we get to the performance. The performance is fabulous. It's on Philips, now Decca, if it still exists. It's Heinrich, Schiff, and Fellner. Wonderful, wonderful pianist, and of course Heinrich Schiff, one of the outstanding cellists in the history of the universe. Beethoven's cello sonatas are remarkable for a number of reasons. First of all, they have no precedence in the classical period other than Boccherini, who was, the generation and a half earlier. So they really are new in some ways, new in that they are written in the classical style, new in the freedom and independence of both the piano part and the cello part. They are real duos for both players. They occupy Beethoven's entire career in patches, in clumps, from his very earliest pieces to about the time of the Fifth Symphony, his middle period, to the beginning of his late period, to about 1815 or so. So they really follow his career. But they're very interestingly experimental works formally. And that's one of the things, being a form whore, as you know, that really, really fascinates me. Also, what's remarkable is the texture, the writing, because a cello sonata with a piano that's a real piano is a very strange beast. It's a strange beast because you don't have a soprano melody instrument. You can if the cello plays all the way in its upper register the whole time, which obviously it's not going to do. You've got a melody instrument that's going to have a hard time asserting its independence against the piano. And many cello sonatas, including those, for example, by Brahms, and whatnot, sound to me as though the piano and the cello are playing two different pieces that happen to be, coexisting rather uneasily, as often as not, because they exist on two different planes of tone. But I don't get that sense with Beethoven. With Beethoven, I really get a feeling that he has thoroughly understood the difficulties at hand and succeeded in surmounting them. And that's what makes these pieces so wonderful. Now, there are 5 cello sonatas and a bunch of really fun, actually, early sets of variations. And I want to just tell you how they're shaped, just to give you a sense of how remarkable they really are. So there are 2 Opus 5 cello sonatas. And one of the reasons Beethoven wrote cello sonatas as his Opus 5 in his early period, in the 1790s and that point, is because he didn't want to compete directly with Haydn and Mozart. And Haydn and Mozart didn't write cello sonatas. So Beethoven had the territory more or less to himself. He also probably had a friend who was a cellist, but, that's another issue. The early cello sonatas, well, the first one, they have similar form. And the form is essentially a 2-movement operation. The second one sort of has 3 movements, but they're attached. You have a slow adagio introduction, followed by an allegro, a real allegro, sonata form allegro, and concluding with a rondo, last movement. That's how they work. And, that is, you would think, sort of a smaller form than the piano sonatas or violin sonatas, which could have been in 3 or 4 full-fledged movements. But these are actually big works. The first movement of the first cello sonata is 14 minutes long. That's a serious movement. A really serious movement. It has an introduction, yes, in slow tempo, but the initial allegro is not all that crazy fast. And the final rondo is allegro vivace. In the second sonata, which is in G minor, a juicy minor key, the adagio sostenuto ed espressivo opening is really a miniature full adagio movement. And it leads into allegro molto, più tosto, presto, which is really, really vivacious. It's almost really fast, more like presto. And then another rondo finale. So Beethoven is trying to find a shape that is actually somewhat special and unique to the combination of instruments that he's selected. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because the cello is a gorgeous instrument for songful and somewhat melancholy pieces and slow tempos. But you may not want to have a whole big, long, hairy adagio in the middle with just the piano and the cello, especially with Beethoven's a pianist. He wants to give the piano something to do, and he doesn't want to overwhelm the cello. You have the piano singing the melody for minutes on end while the cello sort of grinds away underneath like a dying cow. I mean, this never happens. It never happens in these pieces. They're fascinating. Then number 3 is Opus 69. That's from Beethoven's middle period. And we hear something of a similar concept, only now it's expanded. Typically, because it's Beethoven's middle period, you have a moderate tempo opening movement, allegro ma non tanto, which means, vivacious but not too much, so that everybody has a chance to be heard and it doesn't really involve a lot of banging and pounding by the piano. Then you've got a scherzo. There's no slow movement in this sonata. The scherzo is delightful because it allows for wonderful interplay between the cello and the piano. They trade things, they toss things back and forth. You can, if you're moving quickly, everybody has a chance to do little solo things, and you can have rhythmic hoochies, and it's just lots of fun. And then the finale, in this case, sort of goes back to what he did in the first sonatas, only now it's a finale. It's an adagio cantabile, a quasi-slow movement, followed by an allegro vivace, and it's almost 9 minutes long. So you do have the essence of a slow movement, followed again by a quick finale. And the prevalence of quick tempos is one of the things that makes these pieces so successful, that makes Beethoven force his players to really have a lot of dialogue. And we hear that dialogue, and we feel that the cello and the piano really are well matched. So then we've got 2 late sonatas. They're Opus 102, and both of them have extraordinarily contrapuntal episodes because now we're in Beethoven's late period, the same time as the Hummer Clavier Sonata, when he was experimenting with the contrasts and conflicts between dramatic music, that is music in sonata form, that has a strongly tonal, goal-directed projection, attitude or manner, and contrapuntal music, as in fugues, where things are rhetorical. That is, the players sort of sit there and discuss something. And he's looking to encompass both means of expression in a larger overall form. And here you'll see he's preserved his cello sonata manner, because number 4, which is in C major, this is Opus 102, number 1, begins with an andante introduction, followed by an allegro vivace main movement. And then this is fascinating because these pieces are in cyclical form. In other words, he's binding the movements together. You've got an adagio that begins the finale, followed by a recollection of the original andante, followed by allegro vivace again. So you've got lots of contrast, but the contrast is within 2 big sections that are musically related to each other. So again, it's a 2-movement sonata, technically, although it really has more bits. And in that sense, it's like those late quartets, that have 7 movements or 6 movements, but they're of wildly different sizes and shapes. Some are merely introductory, some are just little interludes, but the whole point is to create a general frame of discourse that the piano and the cello can engage in. And frankly, there is no other body of Beethoven chamber music, certainly not the trios, wonderful as they are, where he engages in this kind of experimentation prior to the late quartets. And these are the pieces that really kind of set them up in terms of their formal adventurousness. And the last sonata, number 5, is really, really, really lovely. And here we have a genuine adagio. At last, he writes an adagio, an 8-minute adagio for cello and piano. And he writes, con molto sentimento d'affetto, with the most sentiment in its affect, as you can imagine. And for contemporary, period instrument people who think that means I play with no vibrato, I think you should shoot them immediately. I mean, or throw rotten cabbage or do something. It's terrible, the idea. But he begins with an allegro con brio, then you've got a real adagio, a big adagio, and finally a finale, which is allegro fugato. It's a fugue, just like the finale of the Hammerklavier Sonata, which dates from the same period. It's a lot shorter. It's only about 5 minutes long. But the whole point of the Adagio, which is a very deeply, deeply expressive piece, wonderful piece, is that it sets up this fugal finale marvelously, just like the big, huge Adagio in the Hammerklavier Sonata sets up that fugal finale as well. Because what Beethoven is trying to do is give you the maximum amount of contrast between, the depth, the poignancy, the sadness of the slow movement, and this grand rhetorical finish where the two players discuss what has just happened and arrive at some sort of conclusion, which I'm not giving away. You can figure it out when you listen to it. It's an amazing piece of music. And so all 5 of these are wonderful. Then you've got variations on See the Conquering Hero Comes from Handel's Judas Maccabeus, which is wonderful. And then Ein Mädchen oder Weibchen from the Magic Flute. And at last, also Bei Männern welche Liebe fühlen from the Magic Flute. And that is Beethoven's complete music for cello and piano. An extraordinary body of work that I find endlessly fascinating. And we've got these marvelous performances with Heinrich, Schiff, and Fellner, which are my favorites. But there are many. There's Rostropovich and was it Lev Oborin? There's Yo-Yo Ma did them. Every cellist worth their salt has done the Beethoven cello sonatas, and most do them very, very well. So I wouldn't make a fetish about finding this exact version to think that it's going to be somehow, more transcendental or somehow eye-opening than any other out there. It's just very, very good. And there are many of them that are very, very good, and I enjoy them, and you will enjoy them, and you don't have to get frantic about it. But you should listen to these pieces. They are exceptionally fascinating works, even for a composer like Beethoven. And they're as good as unknown, other than to cellists and people who are really hardcore chamber music fanatics, which we all should be, because it's just great music. Forget having to be a chamber music specialist. It's amazing stuff. It really, really is. So keep on listening, friends, and thank you so much for joining me. Take care.